We're going to be talking about woody invasive species control. I'm Caleb Crawford. I'm a farm bill biologist down in southeastern Illinois.
I'm Jacob Birch. I'm in the very northwest corner of the state.
And I'm Zach Stevenson, and I cover the north central part of the state.
All right, let's go ahead and get started here. So, what are invasive species? Invasive species are a species that is non-native to the ecosystem under consideration and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. And there is kind of a difference between a non-native species and invasive species. Those terms can kind of be used interchangeably in a way. A non-native species is just any species that did not evolve in the environment within or with that surrounding community, whereas an invasive species are species that are more aggressive and can move into habitat and monopolize resources like light, nutrients, water, and space, and be detrimental to other species. Uh, and most of those other species are our native species. And so invasive species impact our habitat. They outcompete native species. A lot of times they are super aggressive. They cast a lot of shade, and they can create monocultures. You can see in this picture here that's a pretty thick understory of autumn olive. And so they're pretty good at creating monoculture, which isn't good for wildlife at all. These species are a lot less palatable for our native wildlife because our native wildlife evolved with our native species. And some of these species can actually suppress fire, which can be a detriment to helping control them.
And there are a couple ways that we can control these invasive species. Um, Chemical control is pretty common. That's your herbicides. There are three main ways to apply them through cut stump, basal bark, and foliar application. Foliar is just applying it to the leaves. Basal bark is applying it to the bottom 15 inches of the tree, and then cut stump is where you're just cutting the tree and then applying herbicide to the cambium layer. There are two types of herbicides. You'll have non-selective herbicides, and these are things such as glyphosate and imazapyr. These are going to kill a wider variety of species, so it might not be as good of an idea if you are looking to kill something specific with it that has multiple species that you may want to keep around it. Another type is broadleaf selective, and these are things such as triclopyr, dicamba, picloram, and 2,4-D. These are going to target specifically broadleaf plants. So, like in that previous situation I talked about, if you have something very specific that you want to kill, that might be a better option. Another treatment type is going to be mechanical, things such as hand pulling, mowing, using heavy machinery. With this type of treatment, it's important to note that you want to minimize the disturbance that you cause whenever you're working heavy machinery or something like that, so you aren't spreading seeds or plant matter that will cause the invasive to repopulate pretty quickly. And herbicide is usually needed after most of these methods. For another treatment is fire, very important one. This one can kill plants. Most often, it will stunt their growth. Some species can respond positively to fire, so it's important to know what you have on your land before you decide to burn. And like I said before, it may stunt the plant, so it's a good idea to include mechanical or chemical controls in combination with burning. And finally, not often used is a biological. So using insects or a competitive species to reduce the number of invasives. And this one can kind of be a hit or a miss. One example is the kudzu beetle. It was introduced to try and fight the spread of kudzu, but unfortunately it became an invasive species itself. So that one's a little bit iffy. One thing to note that is important is the timing of the treatment. Things like chemical control often aren't as effective in the spring months whenever sap flow is up and herbicides will be diluted. Usually you want to use chemical control later on in the year, usually in the fall, whenever nutrients starts flowing down to the roots to make sure you kill the plant. So there are two main types of herbicides that we suggest we use. The first one is glyphosate. This is the main chemical ingredient in rodeo, Roundup, Aquastar, Ranger Pro, so on and so forth. Glyphosate usually comes in two forms. This is an aquatic safe version, safe to use in aquatic environments, and usually requires an aquatic safe surfactant. Also, you have a non-aquatic safe version, and this one's more toxic to fish and aquatic invertebrates, so you want to be careful where you're using this, kind of keep an eye on the land. This is the most commonly used herbicides for professional and private individuals alike. So if you're kind of new to herbicide application, this is a great starting point, mostly because it's known to be the most effective and also the least environmentally harmful. So great place to start. In addition, glyphosate is also non-selective, as I mentioned before. It's going to kill a wider variety of plants rather than a broadly selective, which will target certain plants. So that's important to note. And then the second chemical ingredient that is very common is triclopier. This comes in two different forms. That is triclopier 4, which is an inester form, and triclopier 3, which is an inamine form. If you do a basal bark application, it has to be an inester. Triclopier 4 is significantly stronger than triclopier 3, but is extremely toxic to fish and invertebrates, so be careful if you're in an aquatic environment where there's a lot of water around. And with triclopier 3, it's usually less harsh on aquatic systems, but still be careful of where you're using it. And this one is broadly selective, so it'll target specific species, so you don't really have to worry too much about killing things that you might not want to kill.
So we'll start off with some of the invasives here that you can use by those treatments that Jacob noted. The first one is Bradford or the calorie pear. The identification for the leaves, it'll be like a shiny leaf, dark green, leathery oval with heart-shaped. It has small teeth along the edges. It'll be white with 5 petals and it grows in clusters. The fruit will be a small, round, hard brown ball-like look to it. So if you come up to it, identify it, that's what the fruit will look like. The bark will occasionally have thorns on it and shallow furrows and a scaly ridge. It was brought to Illinois in the 1900s to breed native pears to resistant for the fire blight, and now later used for landscaping projects. But the treatment that you should use for the Bradford and Cali repair is a foliar spray with glyphosate or triclopyr, and that'll be in mid-June to mid-October. Like Jacob was saying, that you have to find the windows of when you can really do these, so they're a little bit more treatable so that you get the job done when you actually are going to treat them. You can cut stump with glyphosate or triclopyr. And that'll be in August to February months. So it definitely gets that good take, as well as for basal bark with the triclopyr in August and February on that. If you're not more of a chemical use and you want to use mechanical use for the young trees, they can be pulled, but mature trees have too large of root systems. So as long as it's a young and immature tree, you should be able to use mechanical on this. But if it gets too large, that's when you may want to use the cut stump or the basal bark. The fire may stunt, but it's not effective. So you're really going to want to use the chemical on this, or if it is small, like I said, the mechanical use, just so that you can get the most effective way of treating it. I would say plant American plum, flowering dogwood, or eastern redwood or service berries, where you'll get that same sort of eye appeal, but only it'll be a native and a non-invasive tree to be planted.
So the next species is Oriental bittersweet. The easiest way to identify this one is using the flower and the fruits. The flowers are often have 5 petals. They're greenish yellow, and the white pollen on the inside is an important thing to look for. The fruits are usually round red fruits. They have bright yellow capsules, and they tend to grow along the length of the branch rather than being clustered at the end. And then additionally, you can look at the leaf and you can see it's alternate, finely toothed, and kind of rounded at the middle and more tapered toward the end. A pretty common tree that this ends up getting mixed up with is the American bittersweet. You can kind of tell them apart by looking at the fruit and the flowers again. The American bittersweet has a bright orange capsule and yellow orange fruit, and the flowers have yellow pollen inside. And the big one here is that the fruits tend to cluster at the tip of branches rather than being spread along the length of the branch like an Oriental. The Oriental bittersweet came to Illinois from China, Japan, and Korea in the 1860s, and it was originally used for things like erosion control and as ornamental. So some good treatments for Oriental bittersweet, foliar. You want to use glyphosate or triclopier sometime between June and September. And then for basil bark, triclopier. And if you decide to go cut stump, triclopier, glyphosate, and both of those are going to be in August to February range. Once again, in that range where the nutrients is heading down toward the roots. If you decide to go with a mechanical root, you can hand pull seedlings, but you have to make sure to get the root systems. If the root systems aren't out, they'll just resprout. And if you decide to use fire, you're going to want to make sure that you come back in with an herbicide to make sure that the Oriental bittersweet is dead. And good alternatives to this one are the American bittersweet and the trumpet creeper. And then next on our list is the tree of heaven. The easiest way to identify this one is using the leaves this time. The leaves are going to be compound, which means there are going to be multiple leaflets along one branch. And they're going to have smooth sides except for 2 lobes at the base of the leaf. And on the bottom of these lobes is going to be a gland that kind of looks like a tooth. That's the easiest way to identify this one. There are about 11 to 12 leaflets per leaf, and if you crush the leaf, some people say it smells like peanut butter and chocolate, but I think it smells like rotten peanut butter. It is a nasty smell. The flowers are generally clusters of a pale green, tend to turn to yellow flowers. And the fruits, kind of like maples, they're samaras. Their seeds are encased in like a papery leather capsule. And then they came from China in the late 1700s and were really commonly used as ornamentals because they can grow in poor soil really well. And this actually, their introduction led to the spotted lanternfly becoming an invasive as well. So if you do spot this tree and you end up removing it, then you're actually getting rid of 2 invasive species for one. So a good treatment for this plant, if you decide to go foliar using glyphosate or triclopier, you want to make sure you apply this during the uh, during the growing season, but before the leaves change color in the fall. If you decide to go with a basil bark application, you want to use triclopier ester, and you want to apply to the bottom 15 inches of the trunk. You can also use a hack and squirt method for larger trees to apply the herbicide if it's too big, bigger than that, too big to use a regular basil bark. You don't want to do a cut stump or any type of uh, cutting with in like a mechanical way. This is because you'll end up having leaf suckering, which is where new shoots or stems form from the leftover stump or the roots. And this is a big problem. It also, if you have use fire, it'll cause roots leaf suckering. So no cutting, no fire, none of that. You can use hand pulling, but once again, you have to make sure you remove the roots completely. Good alternatives to this one are sumac, ash, walnut, and box elder.
Next on our list would be common buckthorn. To identify it, they'll have alternate leaves, finely rounded teeth, about 3 to 5 strongly curved veins that arch toward the tip in them. They occasionally fold, so you might see them folded over a little bit. They'll have a dark black, densely clustered fruit, and it's around the end of the branches that you'll see that. The flower that it'll produce is a green to greenish yellow, short thread-like stalk with 4 petals for the flower. It was brought to the United States and Illinois from Europe in the mid 1800s, used in hedges or shelter belts, and later put in for decorative pieces for people. Some ways to treat common buckthorn. It's mechanical, and you can pull the younger ones. Older dug grubbing tools, if you were trying to get that out there. Most of these are all wanting the root system to be completely gone. Fire will kill the shrubs and destroy the canopy, but it may simulate germination. Uh, Chemical uses, you can foliar use it with triclopyr amine in water. Just be cautious near water. So that's where you're going to want either the triclopyr 3 or 4, depending on where you're next to water. Definitely don't spray it into waterways, but those are the ways that you can kind of, see where you're at and what you have surrounding it. Basil bark, you can use triclopyr ester on the bottom 15 inches of the stump to treat it for the basil bark. You can also cut it, the triclopyr amine in water, just to make sure that you have the one that you want for sure, whether it's triclopyr 3 or 4, like I said, to make sure that you're around water, to be careful with that. Hazelnut, viburnums, nannyberries, or black haws are good alternatives. But that's some of the other alternatives that you could get to have sort of a similar look and similar stature.
All right. Next up is going to be multiflora rose. For the identification, the leaves are alternate and have toothed edges. And the flowers are going to be white with 5 petals. And the fruits are going to be small, red, and clustered at the ends. The origin of this species, it entered into the United States in 1866 from East Asia and spread to Illinois by 1950. The rootstock was used for ornamental roses, and also it was used for erosion control, hedgerows, and wildlife cover. Another big use for this was living cattle fence. It's covered in thorns, so it can create a pretty good barrier there. And then for the treatment, you can use glyphosate or triclopyr in water in June through September. For a basil bark treatment, you're going to want to use the triclopyr ester with a basil oil. That basil oil is important also for a lot of the other species that we talked about, because that's what helps the chemical penetrate the stump through the bark. And that's going to be effective in June through February. Cut stump, is you can use glyphosate or triclopyr amine in water or triclopyr ester in oil, depending on what kind of situation you're in. And that's going to be effective in June through February. I will say, well, for mechanical, you can use chainsaws for larger plants, but usually that's impractical due to the root damage, and they're covered in thorns and they grow in pretty thick masses. So for this one, I would really steer people towards a foliar treatment, because if you ever dealt with multiflora rose, it's pretty difficult to actually get down into the stump. It's really multi-stemmed and covered in thorns. Some alternatives for this are going to be, we have some native roses like prairie rose, also a hazelnut and witch hazel. And then next up is going to be autumn olive. And so the identification for this, the leaves are alternate, wavy, ovate, and they're dark green on top with that silver bottom. That silver bottom is going to be a dead giveaway for the autumn olive. You can see it in the pictures there. The fruits are small little red berries. And this was originally introduced in 1930 from Asia as an ornamental. It was also used for erosion control, and mine reclamation and wildlife food. This species is a nitrogen fixer, so they figured it'd be good for mine reclamations to help amend those soils. As we've come to find out, it's pretty dang invasive. For treatment of autumn olive, for foliar, for this is going to be some of your smaller plants less than 6 feet tall. You can use glyphosate or triclopyr. I've personally had better luck with the triclopyr over glyphosate. For the basal bark treatment, you'll want to use the triclopyr ester. And again, add in that basil oil for any basil bark treatments you're doing. The cut stump, you can use glyphosate or triclopyr amine or the triclopyr ester. For mechanical, they have pretty deep root systems, so heavy machinery will be needed. But if the soil has enough moisture in it, you can usually pop them out. And you're always going to have to follow up with herbicide when doing that because you may or may not get all the roots and they can stump sprout from any existing roots in the soil. Fire has little to no impact. This is one where if there's a heavy infestation, it does a pretty good job at shading everything out, and there's not a lot of fuel underneath them to be able to carry a fire. Some alternatives for autumn olive are going to be sorry, I missed the slide there. Uh, so alternatives for this are going to be hazelnut, choke cherry, and spice bush.
Next on our list is burning bush, I've heard it for invasive purposes called winged wahoo. By identification, it is opposite, narrow at the base and wide at the end. It'll have a pointed tip, finely serrated, and turns bright red. As you can see in the top picture there, how dark red and bright it becomes. The flower will be a greenish yellow with 4 petals, and then it'll have a fruit in those capsules that splits open to reveal an orange seed. On the branches, you can kind of tell in that top picture, it has corky wings, but if you get up close to it, there's wings that flare off of it that kind of look like paper that is on the edge of it. So it kind of runs down the whole edge of that branch. It arrived from Northeast Asia around the mid 1800s, and it was used for ornamental for bright fall colors. As you can see, it's pretty red, and it gets nice and colorful for people. So that's why they wanted to put it as an ornamental or pieces that kind of show in their property. But burning bush treatments, you can use glyphosate for a foliar treatment or triclopyr ester, 4 inches in diameter. It is a cluster, so it's harder to kind of get down in there or to get all of those. So if you are using a basal treatment, just make sure that you're getting as much as you can to try to get that to eliminate it. You might have to have, or you probably will have follow-up treatments of those. Cut stumps, you could use glyphosate or triclopyr amine. The fire may kill some of the seedlings, but it cannot be controlled with fire. So, as fire is a really good alternative for some invasives, this one you'll want either the mechanical or chemical as alternatives for that to kind of make sure that you can get those taken care of as good as you can. For mechanical, you can be pulled with heavy machinery, but when the ground is wet, just to try to make sure that you get that whole root system out of there. Black chokeberry, smooth sumac, or eastern wahoo, or even elderberries are good alternatives for the winged wahoo or burning bush. But you can definitely see why people would want them because it's nice and colorful. But with those alternatives, you'll definitely get the same appeal.
Next up is going to be Japanese honeysuckle. For the identification, the leaves are opposite, they're ovate, they have smooth edges. Some of the younger ones can be lobed, and it's somewhat evergreen. And this is also the vine version of the honeysuckles. And with it being somewhat evergreen, it holds its leaves well into the early winter, well after that first good frost of the year. The flowers are tubular, white to yellow, and bilobed. They've got small little black berries for their fruit. And this was originally brought over in 1806 as a ground cover, and it was widespread by the early 1900s. For the treatment, the foliar application is going to be with glyphosate after the first frost of the year. And then also triclopyr can be used summer through fall. The basal bark and the cut stump method, you can use glyphosate and or triclopyr. The mechanical, you can dig or pull the root systems, but it can be difficult to remove the entire system, so you'll likely have to follow up with herbicide to hit those resprouts. Burning, spring burns kill younger plants and removes the density. And you'll want to still use herbicide after because it'll likely resprout or there'll be existing seed sources there from that species that'll resprout. One consideration when burning is this, since this is a vine, it can grow up into the canopy of trees, and so it can ladder. It's a ladder fuel up into the tops of the trees. So if you've got that going on in your burn unit, that's something to definitely pay attention to, and try to remedy that beforehand to prevent that from happening. Another note on this species, since it is a vine, it can be pretty entangled with itself, and it can be difficult to find like one singular stump of the plant. So a lot of times the foliar application is going to be a pretty good option for this one. Some alternatives are going to be trumpet honeysuckle or trumpet creeper. And also, if you're looking for like a ground cover, then the warm season grasses in a forward blend will be a pretty good option for you.
And continuing on with the honeysuckles, you have a bush honeysuckle. This one's leaf is going to be opposite, oval shaped with tapered ends. It's going to have smooth edges, and the underside is going to be slightly fuzzy. It's going to have small little hairs under there. The flower starts out white and then turns yellow as the season goes on, and its fruit are red berries. One important thing to note is that if you're trying to tell a native honeysuckle from an invasive honeysuckle, you can break the stem and you can look inside there. And if it's hollow inside, it's going to be an invasive, so it's going to be either your bush or your Japanese honeysuckle. And if it's solid, it's going to be a native honeysuckle. Originally, is brought in from Eurasia, so Russia, Turkey, and East Asia, in 1920, and it was used for erosion control, decoration, and wildlife habitat. So a good treatment for bush honeysuckle, if you decide to go with either a cut stump or a foliar method, you can use glyphosate. Mechanicals, you can hand pull younger sprouts, making sure you get all the roots. Older ones are going to be a little bit too hard to get in there to pull them out. And fire is a good tool to use if you're looking to reduce the volume of bigger plants, but it won't kill them completely. So using foliar application afterwards or a cut stump is a good idea. And some good alternatives are going to be dogwood, buttonbush, viburnums, nine bark, and spice bush.
Last one here is a winter creeper. Winter creeper is identified with opposite leaves, oval, dark green, glossy top. Silvery white veins go through it. So in that picture, you can kind of see it really stands out with those silvery white veins. It's an evergreen and it's finely toothed. You can kind of see the serrated edges on the end of it. So that's another sign to see what it is. Greenish yellow flower with small cluster, and it'll have four petals. So it'll show you that four petals in that picture there that'll have that little green in the middle with the four petals popping out. It arrived from East Asia in the early 1900s, as well as an ornamental or a plant breeding program. Um, it is a vine too, so it does have that creep factor too for the winter creeper. If for treatment on that, it's a foliar spray of glyphosate after the first frost. Or if you're going to cut the stump, it like Caleb said, it is a cluster, so it'll kind of be hard to find that exact stump, but you can do it. But if you are using that, you can cut out small sections of the stem and apply glyphosate or triclopyr amine to the ascending vine. Mechanical is not effective. That wouldn't be the way that you'd want to treat this one, but Fire, like the Japanese honeysuckle, it can get up into the canopy and cause it to do that. So if you are burning, like Caleb said, just be careful and to note that so that you know that it could be up to the top and above people where you're not really looking. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're using fire as your form of treatment. Trumpet creeper is a good alternative, as well as native warm season grassland and forbs mix. So on that type right picture, if you're looking for more ground cover, you can still get a beautiful native planting that is good for pollinating and habitat and different uses of that. So that's a great alternative there.
And last but not least is going to be kudzu. This one's pretty easy to identify, kind of similar to poison ivy. It has 3 leaves, but these are going to be a little bit larger. And you can kind of see in the picture there that they're going to have some lobes kind of on the outer leaflets. This one makes really thick blankets across large areas. So if you see kind of like a vine stretching across a really large area of ground, and it has those 3 leaflets, pretty good giveaway for kudzu. Originally, this plant came from Japan in 1876. It came in through the Japanese garden exhibit in Philadelphia, and it ended up escaping and becoming an invasive. And originally, this was used as an ornamental vine. And around 1930, it was thought to be a really good way to control erosion, especially on slopes. But as we know now, it ended up being invasive. Good treatment for kudzu. Foliar is going to be your best bet when it comes to chemical treatment. You can use clopperlid in the fall in August or September, and this one's going to be more selective. So if you don't have that large blanketing of kudzu affecting a large area, and you're trying to get a specific piece, then this might be a good idea. And if you're going for a more non-selective broadcast application to get rid of a lot of kudzu, you want to use aminopyralid, triclopier, or glyphosate. Mechanical methods such as mowing can weaken kudzu, but in the southeast, there's actually one of the really popular things to do in the southeast of the United States is people own herds of goats and they'll rent them out to graze the kudzu, and that's actually been a really effective method to cut down on the bulk of kudzu and then hit it with that foliar spray. Fire is not recommended at all with this plant. It can kill some of the younger kudzu, but kudzu tends to come back stronger after fire, so not recommended. Good alternatives for kudzu are trumpet creeper, grapes, and if you have that blanket and you get rid of it and you're looking for something good to replace it, doing a native grass and forb mix is an excellent idea.
We've mentioned all these today, and there is more in this management of invasive guide. There's a guide here. If you have the link, it'll be, we can send that out as well. Or if you go into your local NRCS offices, they might have copies of that or be able to find where you can get a copy of this. It's a great tool to use. It has mostly what we were speaking of where it came from, how to treat it, and what regions you might see it in. So if you go out to your properties and you think I might have this, it's a very good tool to use. A lot of us farm bill biologists use this just to make sure that we have our identification and see what we can treat or how we can help you as landowners do it. But this is a good resource for you guys to definitely take advantage of.
So with all of these species, one thing to note is it's never a one and done. These species are invasive for a reason. A lot of times they're coming from areas of the world that they're adapted to growing in poor soils, and you bring them over here into the Midwest, where we've got some of the most productive soils in the world. You can imagine why they do pretty well. So there also is a constant seed source from a lot of these species. Whether you're working on it and you've got it all cleared out from your property, your neighbor may not be doing the same, or even a neighbor from further away may not be doing the same. And those are birds can eat the berries and come and poop them out on your property, and then that's the seed source there. And also another important thing that we've hit on a couple times here is it usually takes multiple applications to control these species. A lot of times you may hit them the first time, especially if you've got a large infestation, and you may get, let's say, 95% of them. Then you're also going to have a lot of resprouts from the existing seeds that are left in the soil from that infestation. And using prescribed fire as a tool is a good way to help control some of these species, unless we specifically mentioned that fire is not recommended for that species. There were a few of those, so take note of those. But fire can also be used as control afterwards. It may top kill some of these species, but if you can keep them under control with fire, usually is a pretty good tool to keep in your tool belt. So how do you get help? You can utilize government cost share uh, assistance programs. Some of these are listed here, like EQIP, which is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. The CSP is the Conservation Stewardship Program, and RCPP is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. So usually, EQIP is kind of considered the fix it program. Where you can go in and treat your invasives. If you're in a forestry setting, you can also have a forestry management plan written and then apply for implementation of that, and it may include invasive species removal, TSI, and prescribed fire. And then, or you're in an old pasture situation where you've got invasive species growing up, EQIP is going to be that program to really fix it. Then the CSP program, that is kind of the maintain and enhance program. Let's say you've already got your forestry plan implemented through EQIP and you're looking to maybe do some tree planting or do a little pollinator patch or continue using prescribed fire, that's where that CSP program is really going to come in handy. The RCPP is usually pretty, it's like regionally specific. So in my area, we've got the Rend Lake RCPP. There's several other RCPP grants throughout the state. You'll have to reach out to your office to see if the RCPP is available in your area. It's run very similar to the other two programs there.
And here on the left is the map of Illinois showing all the areas of coverage that our Farm Bill biologist that we take care of. So we cover the whole entire state now. So if any of these areas you reside in, feel free to reach out to your local Farm Bill biologist. We are here to help. We're a tool to be used and take advantage of. We enjoy coming out and trying to make sure that your property is exactly what you're wanting for it. Or if you just call for any information about this stuff, our team in Illinois is very knowledgeable and super willing to help. So do not hesitate to reach out to any of the people on this map if they're in your area, or if not, we'll steer you in the right direction. You can also go onto the website and find this as well.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, again. For now, we'll go ahead and take questions if anyone in the audience did want to ask our biologist any questions while they're here. Well, it is not looking like anyone is popping any questions in the chat. So for all of our participants, if any questions do come up later, I encourage you to reach out to your nearest Farm Bill biologist. Zach had the coverage area map of our biologists throughout the state there, as well as a link to find a local biologist. You can also do that on our state website, which is www.ihuntil.com. And again, I encourage you to reach out to your local biologist if any other questions pop up. It does look like we do have a question in the chat. Can you see that, guys?
I can take that one. So the question is, how long after removing the invasive do you wait before replanting a new species? That's a very good question. So usually I encourage people if you've got a heavy infestation, go in and try to wipe it out as much as you can. But you're gonna get some resprouts. It's gonna come back. So usually it takes a couple years to really get it under control. But if you are like, let's say you've got autumn olive or one of those other species that we've talked about it, and you get it all removed, and you got it pretty good. Let's say you got it 90% covered. And then you can go ahead and probably plant like a warm season grass pollinator mix, and then be able to, if it's one of those species that doesn't fare very well with fire, then you can use that fire to keep it knocked back afterwards, but you'll still always want to be vigilant in following up and making sure that you're not getting any resprouts so you don't end up back at square one.
All right, I'm just going to do one last call for questions before we wrap things up here. All right, guys, I think we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you to all of our attendees for hopping in tonight. We appreciate your attendance. Thank you again to our biologists. And I hope everybody has a great evening. Again, we will make sure to provide this recording as well as the presentation to all attendees. So keep an eye out for that in your email inboxes. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.